So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Speaking of Water webinar event. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors and introduce our guest speaker for today, Nataly Escobedo Garcia. The Q&A box should be accessible for you to write in your questions throughout the presentation, and they will be discussed at the end. Nataly is a policy manager focused on water. She was born in Mexicali and raised in Oxnard, California. She has a BA from the University of California, Santa Cruz in Latin American and Latino Studies, an MA in Anthropology from California State University, LA, and a PhD in Social Ecology from the University of California, Irvine. She's particularly interested in how issues of water injustice, water rights, and water governance impact people of color, low-income people, and farm worker communities in California. Nataly leads Leadership Council's work focused on groundwater sustainability, drinking water and wastewater access, and just transition and agricultural land transition. Many Californians, particularly low-income communities and communities of color, face persistent and overlapping barriers to equitable water access. These challenges extend beyond simple availability and include limited political representation, unaffordable water rates, aging or inadequate infrastructure, and exclusion from decision-making processes that shape water governance. Such inequities are often intensified in unincorporated areas and regions affected by chronic groundwater overdraft, where regulatory gaps and fragmented oversight can leave residents without reliable access to water. In regions like the San Joaquin Valley, these systemic issues are further compounded by agricultural demands, climate pressures, and long-standing patterns of environmental injustice. Residents in these communities are more likely to experience unsafe drinking water, including contamination from nitrates and other pollutants, while also facing higher relative costs for basic water services. This talk will explore the structural and policy-driven obstacles that limit access to clean, safe, and affordable water in the San Joaquin Valley. So without further ado, Nataly, please take it away.
Thank you for the intro, Kayla. And thank you folks for joining us today. As was already mentioned, my name is Nataly. I'm a Water and Climate Policy Manager with Leadership Council. I've been with Leadership Council for almost 6 years now, and then I've been studying California water for the better part of the last decade. And today I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about some of the obstacles that we have in achieving our human right to water here in the San Joaquin Valley. First, a little bit about the organization I work for. Leadership Council is an environmental justice nonprofit who through community organizing, research, legal representation, and policy advocacy, we work to shift public investment priorities, guide environmental policy, and promote the provision of basic infrastructure and services. We work across Merced, Madera, Fresno, Tulare, Kern counties, as well as the lower part of Riverside County, which is the eastern Coachella Valley. While we work on a number of interconnected environmental justice areas, including energy, transportation, housing, and climate, my work, as mentioned, was heavily focused on water, access to drinking water services, extension of wastewater services, and of course, protection of groundwater. And right now, myself and our water and climate team provide technical, policy, and legal support to more than a dozen communities on about 15 different drinking water and wastewater projects in the San Joaquin Valley. So in 2012, California became the first state in the nation to recognize a person's right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, codified under Water Code 10.6.3. And while at first the law seemed largely symbolic, eventually the law would propel forward historic investments for water systems across the state with the passing of the Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, or SAFER. It moved forward a systemic way of mapping failing systems across the state, and it spurred critical research and policy discussions regarding low-income rate assistance for water in California. While there's no denying that we have made tremendous progress since the passing of the human right to water, progress has not been the same everywhere, and our goal to achieving this right for all Californians was met with the challenge of not just our climate reality, but decades of water inequity that will need to be addressed if we really want to make this right a reality for all Californians. Right. In my presentation today, I'm going to go over a general overview of water governance in California and water inequality. I'm going to discuss the San Joaquin Valley in particular and really focus on community advocacy that led to really important policy responses to aid in meeting the human right to water and the work that's going to continue in the decade to come. Right. So often when we hear about California's water system, it's described as one of the most complex in the world. With water governance that was developed over more than a century through overlapping laws, agencies, and infrastructure projects, you can see how we've earned that title. To add to the complexity of all these overlapping laws, policies, and systems, we also don't govern our surface water and groundwater the same. They're actually two completely different regulatory regimes, despite the fact that hydrologically they are interconnected. Our water governance in California is heavily fragmented. We have an overlap of federal agencies, state agencies, regional boards, counties, cities, not to mention hundreds of local water districts. And it's important to note that water districts, many were historically designed to support agricultural and suburban growth. So that was one of the original goals of these districts. At the local level, your local district typically will manage things like water delivery, infrastructure maintenance, billings and rates, local water supply planning. While on the state side, they're focused on regulation, environmental standards, and emergency measures, for example, to respond to drought crisis or flooding. Two agencies that's important to keep in mind is our Department of Water Resources, who they are primarily in the governance context, they're primarily tasked with overseeing the management of our groundwater. And then the State Water Resource Control Board, or the State Water Board, who oversees like a wide suite of policies, including water quality protection, distribution of important state funding, and then enforcement on things like water shutoffs or if your water system is failing. We have many factors that drive water inequity here in California, but the most prevalent tend to be political marginalization, aging and inadequate infrastructure, affordability, and groundwater overdraft. On the political marginalization side, often we find that there is limited representation in rural and unincorporated communities. A lot of these communities are overseen to some extent by irrigation district, where representation usually comes in the form of a property owner. If I'm working with a renter, that may mean that they won't have access to that board in the same way a property owner will. There's also a lot of language barriers and just procedural inequities. On the language barrier side, while we have some requirements around language access, they are very heavily tied to if the public body can economically provide those language access, so it's not necessarily a mandate. And on the procedural side, most of the time you're going to find that many of your public agencies are going to have their board meetings during the day, might not have, for example, like a telephonic option to join the call if you're not anywhere near. If somebody's needing to give some kind of comment at your Board of Supervisors meeting, that could often require driving at least an hour in to be able to go to the physical location where that meeting is happening. On the aging and inadequate infrastructure side, I work primarily with small water systems that often lack the technical expertise needed to make sure that system is running sustainably, which often goes hand in hand with not having the financial resources to be able to, for example, hire that technical expertise that's needed. And then treatment capacity is increasingly an issue with a lot of the communities we work with. As certain contaminant levels gets higher, sometimes your system will not have the capacity it needs to treat a higher level of that contaminant, then leading to infrastructure issues. Affordability, I think, is something that most Californians are experiencing some level of higher water rates. Our infrastructure is aging, which is going to mean we're going to have to invest in that infrastructure. For smaller low-income communities, this can be pretty tough. You have a smaller customer base, so it's a lot more difficult to spread the cost across that customer base, often leading to higher water rates. And then there's the cost burden. Oftentimes, the communities that I work with are paying to be a part of a system that is currently not able to provide safe water to them. So not only are they paying for water, but then they're also going out to buy, for example, bottled water to offset the unsafe water in their home. So essentially, you're paying for water twice. And not only are you paying for water twice, most of the communities we work with are pretty far from, like, for example, a city. So you're also having to drive in pretty far to buy bottled water in bulk, adding to the cost burden. And then, of course, groundwater overdraft. The communities I work with are basically 100% groundwater dependent, which has led to a lot of issues over the years as their systems are not able to pull water, or in some cases completely lost access to water, especially in the summer when pumping goes up. It doesn't help that California is actively in drought cycles. So even if there's efforts to replenish that groundwater, we're also met with the challenge of, well, that drought keeps coming. And then just in general, climate change is massively changing the big swings between dry and wet, making some of those dry years a lot more dry and those wet years extremely wet, leading to other issues for the system. When talking about water issues in California is contending with, these are compounded for communities in the San Joaquin Valley because of the inequities that already exist. Water inequity is not simply a problem of water scarcity or unsafe water, but a social, political, and environmental and public health issue. And water quality and water inequity disproportionately impacts low-income communities, rural residents, communities of color, and unincorporated communities. I'm going to show y'all a minute from this documentary that came out, I believe, about 2 years ago now. You can find the full documentary on YouTube. It's about 43 minutes, but it gives you a summary of what we're seeing in the San Joaquin Valley.
It's kind of surreal to go out there and talk to people that are not familiar with these issues, that you tell them here in the heart of California, there's people that they don't know if their tap is going to turn on, if it's going to give them water, or what the quality of the water it's going to give them.
Got up to wash up and I noticed I was having no water pressure at all. So I went out to the well. I looked at it and it showed 12 pressure only. Like, whoa. We thought maybe it was a water flow thing, you know. He said, call the guy up to come over here and work on the well. So I called him up. They came out. They only said, well, we're going to gone 1 foot down more, go a little farther. But your was going to go dry.
It's a whole generation where they think that water comes from those 5-gallon jugs because they've never seen anything different.
This morning, the surprising news from California. Despite the historic drought, the state is using more water, not less. Water usage rose 19%.
California is running out of water. So, it's important to recognize that in such a populated state. It puts not only our water security at risk, puts our food security at risk, puts our economy at risk.
If California's drought continues, mandatory water restrictions could be heading out.
We don't get some rain and we get some additional surface water, potentially you're gonna have to ground. And that's tough.
You should be measuring the snowpack, dry area. That's scary.
The groundwater is still being extracted and people still losing their wells in the middle of wet season.
I never thought I'd be fighting for water.
Yeah.
feel more entitled to that water.
Finally, a powerful storm bringing rain, wind, and snow to Central California.
Since there is no normal, precipitation patterns in California are always highly variable. Any given year, it's a roll of the dice.
The threat of widespread flooding has led to some evacuation orders and warnings.
Your stories are from the old timers, but you drive down this area, you just never would realize that this used to be a lake, and then here we are.
But this is not something that we can stick our heads in the sand and just ignore. The water crisis is truly a global crisis, and it's something that everyone needs to care.
Feel free to check out the full documentary and if you're interested. But that just gives you a little snippet of a bit of what I just went over and a little bit of a like a visual of what's going on in the San Joaquin Valley. Oh. Okay. So for folks who might not be familiar with the San Joaquin Valley, it's an area of the Central Valley of California that comprises about 7 counties of Northern and 1 of Southern California, as can be seen on the map. The San Joaquin Valley is known for being a large agricultural productive area of the state, but also as a hotspot for a lot of the water issues California is grappling with. Everything from overpumping to failing water systems. And while there are water systems failing across the state, they are heavily concentrated in this region. Something that's important to note about the San Joaquin Valley is how many disadvantaged unincorporated communities we have in the valley. So this law was passed in 2011, SB 244, which actually established this definition for the state. And the reason why this had to be established was because of historical racial segregation, discriminatory housing policy, jurisdictional fragmentation. California had to recognize there were communities that were grappling with different issues than the rest of California. Many of these low-income, predominantly communities of color were established on geographic fringe of municipalities or bypassed entirely. As you can see here in the South Merced picture, these little red dots are what are called fringe communities. They're unincorporated communities that the city of Merced literally built around. And these communities, unfortunately, have been denied access to basic municipal infrastructure like clean water, sewer services, and in some cases, paved roads. The San Joaquin Valley has approximately 3,100 people living in unincorporated communities. We also have some of the highest rates of poverty in the state, where we average between 12 to 19%, depending on what county you're in. And then the San Joaquin Valley also has stark wealth disparities, where sometimes you'll find pockets of large influence alongside extreme poverty. I mentioned a lot of this because while I work primarily on water, it's important to understand that these communities face a mountain of disinvestment that makes water challenges that much more difficult to address. Many of the communities that I work with either have substandard housing or lack of affordable housing. They lack green space, parks, or community gathering spaces. Most of the time we have community meetings in somebody's front yard or backyard, and you'll see some pictures kind of showing that. They have a lot of low quality schools, and oftentimes they lack safe transportation infrastructure, or they don't have it at all. As I mentioned, some areas don't even have paved roads. We deal with some of the worst water quality in the nation, air quality in the nation. And a lot of the communities that we work with are surrounded by polluting industries. And I'm not just talking about like agriculture. We have seen a rise in warehousing, and then more recently, inland ports are popping up throughout the San Joaquin Valley. Currently, we have about 64,000 people across about 64 disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley that receive unsafe water. During the 2012-2016 drought, the state received more than 2,500 well failures report, majority of which came from the Central Valley. And then during our recent drought, the 2020-2022 drought, over 6,000 households were reported to have gone dry. And as you heard in the film, even in wet years, wells have gone dry. So there was actually wells that were reported dry in 2023 and 2024, which were historic wet years for California. And based on a couple of 2020 reports, because our groundwater levels and our aquifers have been so depleted, there could be as high as 1,200 more wells at risk of going dry, potentially impacting about 127,000 people's primary source of water. As I mentioned, all the communities that I work with are 100% groundwater dependent. As a state, we depend on groundwater for about 40 to 50% of our water use. In a drought year, that quickly jumps to around 60%. In the Central Valley, you could have the valley depending about 80% of all of its water use on groundwater during a drought year. The other issue that we contend with in the Central Valley is that there's widespread groundwater quality contamination. Some of it is natural, but some of it is from industry. And some of the main contaminants that we're dealing with are nitrates, 1,2,3-TCP arsenic, and Chrome 6 or hexavalent chromium. The best way I can explain some of the barriers that we have here in the Central Valley in achieving the human right to water is that we're having to build the plane while we are flying it. Drought, unfortunately, will put systems at risk of being dewatered, but on the flip side, flooding can come with harms that at one point we wouldn't have even crossed our minds. For example, I work on drinking water projects, and during the wet years, a lot of work had to stop on these projects because you can't build something if it's raining out, sort of prolonging timelines on construction. And sometimes we have inadequate or lack of information. I've had more projects than I'd care to admit run into an issue where, for example, we thought there was a public right of way, but county records didn't reflect that. Again, delaying a project in ways that we didn't anticipate. And then also as the state analysis of failing system is refined in positive ways, we are learning that there are more challenges, again, that we originally didn't think we were going to cross. A big one being technical, managerial, and financial capacity of a system, especially in the long-term operation and maintenance of that system. This is an area that we do see the state exploring more proactively. Not a bad thing that they're exploring it, but as we know more about some of these systems, they can start moving from being at risk of failing to failing. And of course, emerging contaminants. I think a lot of us are awaiting some kind of maximum contaminant level for PFAS or PFOAs, or at least a class of them. But the minute that does happen, that means a whole nother set of regulations for small water systems and another standard that the water system needs to meet, which again goes back to the technical, managerial, and financial capacities of that system. Unfortunately, more often than not, we have obstacles with political will locally to consolidate these water systems and extend services. While I've been fortunate to work on some projects where the neighboring water system or city was willing to extend that service, majority of the projects that I've worked on have needed a lot of local advocacy and in some cases state intervention to make that possible. And then while we do have programs that support domestic wells, and they're getting better and better, they definitely have improved in the last couple of years, like the SAFER program. We got the SB 403 authority, and then in the Central Valley, we have the Central Valley salt and nutrient program. Generally, we don't have specific requirements for domestic wells that are outside of, for example, the permitting phase when you're getting your well permitted. So they're not required to be tested, and they're not generally regulated. So then you do have this subset of people in the Central Valley dependent on domestic wells where protections kind of fall in a little bit of a gray area in our law. And then we had to work with community to change water law in particular, our water code and our health and safety code, in order to address some of the obstacles that were arising as we were trying to get services extended to communities. And then on the funding side, These projects, as you deal with inflation and then just longer timelines for getting them built, costs can go up. And sometimes funding can roll out very slowly. All the projects that we work on are dependent on public funds. And of course, your state needs to do their due diligence and ensuring that your public funds are being invested responsibly. But that means that projects that are state funded dependent do have to work on longer timelines. On average, a drinking water consolidation project could take anywhere between 7 to 10 years to complete if it's fully dependent on public funding. So despite these challenges, since the passing of the Human Right to Water, communities in the San Joaquin Valley have come together to advocate for massive changes to our law to ensure the state can guarantee this right. One of the most transformative campaigns was the passing of SB 200. I'm going to call it SAFER moving forward because it's a mouthful. The Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, SB 200, passed in 2019. This was actually focused on solutions for disadvantaged communities that didn't have access to clean water. This bill made $130 million per year available through summer of 2030 to help water providers with operation costs and gives public agencies, nonprofits, utilities, and tribes opportunities to apply for funding to remediate their drinking water problems. Here, actually, the bill itself, SB 200, was signed in the community of Tombstone, one of the communities that I get the pleasure of working with. This is Jovita shaking hands with Governor Newsom when the bill was signed, and then actually included a picture of our groundbreaking event when construction began on this project. And I'm very happy to report that the community now has access to clean water, and they had been on a cluster of domestic wells that had either gone dry or had nitrate issues. So I can proudly say that they now have access to safe water thanks to the SAFER Fund. To address some of the local policy issues we were having, communities pursued changes to the State Water Board's authority, beginning with SB 88. So SB 88 made amendments to Health and Safety Code sections 116680 through 116684. It authorized the State Water Board to order consolidation of water systems that were consistently failing to provide adequate water supply in a disadvantaged community. So in the case of here, I'm featuring a picture of Matheny Tract. This is one of our community meetings this past year. The state ended up mandating the consolidation of their water system, which was Pratt Mutual Water Company, with the city of Tulare. Pratt Mutual did not want to consolidate. The state gained that authority because the Pratt system was failing to mandate the consolidation. But soon enough, community learned quickly that having authority to mandate consolidation was maybe not enough. So in 2019 and 2021, there were additional changes to that same section of Health and Safety Code with SB 508 and SB 403. So in these cases, the law was amended to give the State Water Board more broad authority to deal with difficult consolidations. And SB 508 extended consolidation authority to apply to domestic wells, and it established a petition process so community could request a mandatory consolidation. SB 403 went one more step forward and expanded the State Water Board's authority to mandate consolidation where a water system was at risk of failing. So SB 88 originally didn't allow for the State Water Board to act more proactively to prevent for a water system from failing. SB 403 fixed that by giving the State Water Board the power to order consolidation with a receiving water system where a public water system or a state small system serving a disadvantaged and unincorporated community was consistently failing to provide an adequate supply of drinking water. This picture at the bottom is the celebration in the community of Tuleville. Tuleville, prior to the state adopting a maximum contaminant level for hexavalent chromium or Chrome 6, that was the main contaminant that they were dealing with. The neighboring community did not want to consolidate or extend services to Tuleville. SB 508 was one of, or sorry, 403 was one of the laws that we worked on that bill. Precisely, we actually called it the Tullyville bill because this ended up giving the state the authority to force their neighboring city to extend services to them. So this is actually their celebration when they finally signed their consolidation agreement. And then besides these, which were some of the bigger changes that community pushed for, they've also pushed for other creative ways to address local challenges. I'm not discussing it as much today, but wastewater is a big issue with a lot of the communities we work with. They're dependent on aging septics. So similarly, we worked on SB 1215, which essentially modified the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act to authorize the regional boards or regional water boards to either encourage and, if necessary, mandate the extension of sewer services to disadvantaged communities that are inadequate on-site sewage treatment systems. So fancy way of saying septics. This is actually Miss Barbara. She's from the community of Fairmead. She went up to Sacramento to testify in support of this bill. During the pandemic, we also saw a lot of families that were struggling to pay for their water services. So we pursued expansions of the Water Shutoff Protection Act, which now prohibits urban and community water systems from discontinuing water service for non-payment until the account is at least 60 days delinquent. And it comes with additional protections, including like extending a repayment plan before you move to that shutoff. And then just a few years ago, we also worked on AB 664. We work with a lot of tenants in the San Joaquin Valley, which can come with its own challenges when they're trying to consolidate. So in this bill, it requires landlords who decline state-funded consolidation with public water systems to independently guarantee uninterrupted, safe drinking water for their tenants. And then I think it might be a little bit cut off at the bottom. Oh, yeah, I don't know why I cut it off. Sorry, y'all. Additional efforts included the adoption of the maximum contaminant level for Chrome 6. So this happened just a few years ago, but it was really important. We work with a lot of communities that have issues with Chrome 6. And then it cut off at the bottom, but the state is currently wrapping up its statewide wastewater needs assessment, which is going to give us a whole new view on what sewer issues we have in the state. Of course, despite all these policy interventions, the work does continue, and we are seeing new challenges arise, but of course, communities always finding ways to address those new challenges. But one of the big ones we're having is funding. So one thing that I didn't mention with SAFER, or the Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, it receives its funding from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is attached to our Cap and Trade, or now known as Cap and Invest program. When the law was first passed in 2019, it came with a backfill. So if the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund couldn't fully give the 130, our state budget would kick in whatever the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund couldn't. When Cap and Invest was renegotiated or reauthorized last year, unfortunately, that clause wasn't included in the reauthorizing program. So we are unfortunately in a position where we might not receive the full funding for that program this year. There's currently advocacy at the state level to get that backstop reinstated to ensure that we don't have interruption in these projects that are heavily dependent on state funding. On the federal side, we've also seen a lot less funding available, and in some cases, we've seen funding that was originally we were going to receive from the federal government be majorly delayed. In one case, we didn't hear back from the agency that was extending the grant for a good 6 months, adding a lot of delays to that project. And then holding responsible parties accountable. Groundwater overdrafts doesn't just happen. There are certain parties that attribute to it more than others. As groundwater sustainability agency and management zones are getting their own mitigation programs up and running. It's going to be really, really important to ensure that they're also doing their part in making sure that there are solutions for communities, especially in the cases where they have some responsibility towards why that system is failing. We're also working to cut down extensive timelines. Again, it's incredible that we have state funding, but there are important checks and balances that come with state funding, but that also comes with long timelines. So looking at ways in which we can cut those down so projects don't take, a decade to complete. And in general, we do need stronger groundwater quality protections. Groundwater quality regulation spans so many different agencies that are often not in communication with one another, causing sometimes confusion. And going back to the responsible party piece, it's very easy to play hot potato with who it actually contributed to groundwater degrading. And then in general, we just need more or new water quality regulations. I had mentioned PFAS and PFOAs, but there are certain contaminants that we're looking to the state to revisit in the coming years, arsenic being one of the big ones, looking at something more protective than what we have in the books right now. And then just ensuring that there's strong and equitable implementation of all policy tools. We worked really hard to make sure that the state, make sure the State Water Board has the tools that they need to ensure that communities have access to clean water. So ensuring that they're actually using those policy tools, that community worked really hard to get them. That's all I have for y'all today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about my organization I work with, please feel free to check us out online or on social media. And with that, I can open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Natalie. As of right now, I would invite everybody who is watching with us to please submit your questions into the Q&A. We do have one submitted by Josette Lewis that says, can you speak more about the challenges around consolation to municipal systems? Understand the challenges of funding, political willingness from municipalities. Do you also see trust barriers from disadvantaged communities and their willingness to consolidate with cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can understand why there's barriers to trust when historically your neighboring city didn't want to extend water services or sewer services. A lot of that work that we do with community is one, encouragement, or even like going with them to some of their local neighboring water systems meetings. One, to get to know folks. And on drinking water and wastewater projects, we proactively provide updates to residents on what's going on in the project. And especially where goodwill has been earned with the neighboring either system or city. We will also highlight if there's like ways in which that neighboring city is going out of their way to make sure that the project moves forward as quickly as possible to help with gaining that trust and removing some of those barriers. And on the flip side, sometimes we do get rhetoric that that's less than helpful from the neighboring system. There have been situations where, for example, I had a neighboring system that told us they didn't want to extend services because they didn't think that community could pay for services. Well, really isn't any validity to that statement. Well, in that case, we shared oh my gosh, what do you call it? We shared like the monthly I forget what it's called. Essentially, it shows that residents are paying their bills and they're paying their bills on time. We work closely with the systems that, or at least in some cases, with the systems that provide water to communities. So in that case, they were willing to share that, so the neighboring system could see that actually residents do pay their bills on time, or are paying their bills if they're on some kind of repayment plan. So we do try to look for creative ways to address some of those trust barriers, but They certainly do exist, and mandating a consolidation can definitely add friction to it. But at the end of the day, the state has a responsibility to make sure that they have access to clean water, which means, sometimes the state really does have to come down with some of those regulatory tools. They have a public health responsibility to everyone in the state.
I hope that answered your question, Josette.
Yeah.
We have another participant with a question. They write, "Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I am curious if data centers for AI are being built in the San Joaquin Valley, especially considering the San Joaquin Delta is located there. If so, is there any data on how it has impacted the people's water supply?"
So there are proposals popping up. And in general, like the data center is such a black box for us right now of information. Part of like the policy work that I'm doing for our organization is at least on the water side, trying to understand how much water these data centers could be using. Because we have had proposals pop up, none like right next to communities that we work with, but we are keeping an eye on them in the event that one does pop up. Part of because we have access to legal tools within the organization, we have a whole legal team available. We have in some cases challenged projects if we either felt the environmental impact report was inadequate. So we're keeping an eye on data centers in the event that in a project is proposed anywhere near the communities we work with, and we need to engage at some level. But unfortunately, in terms of like how it impacts Californians, I don't have like data on that directly. Because at least the data centers that I've seen popped up right now are still in the conceptual phase, or they're going through permitting locally. But in general, not getting many warm feelings from any community that we work with on these data centers. We do get a lot of questions asked and a lot of concerns. But there are state efforts to at least have some level of transparency. So there's a couple of bills that are going right now through the policy process that might answer some of those questions in the coming years.
Thank you.
Oh,
Another question.
yeah, happy to send. I'm happy to share my slide with you, Kayla, if you want to share it with folks who joined the presentation.
This is actually being recorded, so I will be uploading this to our website and our Water UCI YouTube, where all of the slides should be visible, as well as contact information from your final slide, Natalie. So it will be readily available to rewatch and share with whoever you would like to in a few days. So,
And then I'll drop my email in the chat if anyone would like a copy of the presentation. More than happy to send it over.
are there any other questions from our participants at this time? Okay. Maybe we'll give it a minute in case anyone's mid-typing. All right, it seems like... Oh, okay, there is one more question. Out of curiosity, would desalination help the San Joaquin Valley?
We're probably too far away from the ocean for that to help. And in general, obviously, like for a healthy water budget, you want to have like a diversified water budget. But realistically, surface water would come with its own cost burden for the communities that we work with, not only the infrastructure to transport the surface water, but then you're going to also have to treat that water. So at least right now, it's not an option that we're exploring. Oh, so as far as I know, water systems on tribal land, oversight is our federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency for the US government. However, the state water board has resources and tools to support water system on tribal lands. And there's often like set aside specifically to support tribal communities. So there is funding available to support, but their oversight is of the water systems at least isn't with the state water board. It's with the U.S. EPA. So they're not exempt from the requirements. Their requirements are the U.S. EPA ones. California sometimes has, or not sometimes, often has like higher standards, just because California, I think, really prides itself on like always wanting to achieve more when it comes to water.
For anyone who did not see that question submitted in the chat, the question reads, are Native American controlled lands exempt from drinking water requirements? I think that was a typo. Does someone have to provide water to their homes? If we have no more questions, would you like to flash your slide, the last slide again with your contact information and your website? And then thank you everybody for coming today and for participating in our Speaking of Water webinar series. As I stated earlier, this is being recorded and it will be uploaded to both our website and our YouTube channel. So sometime next week, it will be readily available for your viewing and sharing. Thank you everybody for coming. And thank you again, Nataly.
Yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time to listen to me talk.